last thing before I send it for open discussion. I think there are some rules surrounding who can be a co-chair, and so so before we get open discussion, Jane, are you able to describe kind of the parameters for co-chairs?
Sorry, still trying to get back to my computer. Yes, happy to. Thanks. And I'm recording now, so thanks for your patience as I got on. So yes, there is a process roadmap document that the council accepted on behalf of to articulate the structure and composition of subcommittee, steering committee, and the process for determining who sits where and how we get that representation. And within that document, which was adopted as final, it articulates that there will be two co-chairs for the subcommittees, one from both being occupied by council members, one council member being from the executive branch and one council member being from the legislatively appointed council members. So TJ occupies the executive branch appointment as a delegation, but specifically speaking to that commissioners and secretaries can delegate their council member position as a subcommittee co-chair to staff. So TJ sits here on behalf of Commissioner Tierney, and Leslie Ann was a legislatively appointed council member. So that essentially leaves Jared and Brian Gray as the two other legislatively appointed council members who sit on this subcommittee. So unless there's an objection, it feels like one of the two of them should occupy the other co-chair space, recognizing that other subcommittees have also opted to include additional co-chairs beyond the two council members. And so that if there was interest or expertise brought to bear by other existing subcommittee, a bird just crashed into my window, existing subcommittee members, or as you think about subcommittee composition and bring on additional subcommittee members, if there's capacity on those new members also to sit in that position, that would be welcome as additional co-chairs too for consideration. But I would start first with considering Jared and Brian's position on the subcommittee and if they have capacity to step into co-chair.
Thank you, Jane, for that. So I guess I want to open the floor to subcommittee members for discussion.
All right, I'll jump in. I kind of come back to you, TJ, and you feeling like the support that you have as co-chair is there. And I would ask you the question on, either of those people that you think could be appropriate for someone who could work with you, or do you have other thoughts have you put any thought into that from just your perspective and balancing out some of the things that you might need help with?
So most of my thought has gone to how we're replacing Leslie Ann's expertise, and also just recognizing that two things. That one, well, with either Jared or Brian, we just have two white males as co-chairs of this committee, and also the broader composition of the committee. Even those who are able to make it today, we have 5 white males on the committee. So, as far as co-chair goes, I've worked with both Brian and Jared previously, and I think both of you are great. And it seems to me that there's some overlap, and with Jared's work on modeling and with the EAN Pathways report and the modeling that I'm doing for the Comprehensive Energy Plan, and we speak the same language, I think, and so that may make it easier. I can't speak to the capacity of either of you. I feel a little weird talking about this with Brian not able to be here, but I guess I'll stop there. I'll stop there and see if,
Yeah, let me comment on the expertise area, just because Leslie Ann and I do overlap quite a bit in the Venn diagram of our expertise. And it's Leslie Ann's still going to be involved in the full council, and as needed, we have talked about how she can help with parts in a very targeted way. So she does have some capacity to work through me on that. So I don't think we necessarily need to go find someone else who's got the climate expertise and modeling work. I think that we probably have that covered by myself and Leslie Ann also just being a little more selective with her time.
great, thank you, Jay.
And I'll just note, I had a nice conversation with Leslie Ann yesterday, and she did say that if there are specific pieces in the, that the subcommittee is looking at in our work plan where it would be helpful for her to engage, she's happy to come back and engage or participate in work groups, as is, her schedule is, as is possible for her schedule, and as kind of is most directly related to kind of her expertise and experience. So I don't think we've fully lost her, which is great news.
Yeah, great. I agree. And that's consistent with my conversations that I've had with her separately also. So thank you. Jared, do you want to speak to your capacity?
I would say that I would be able and willing to fill that role if that was what the subcommittee wanted. I feel like we have a lot of important work to keep moving forward, and I don't want that all to be on your shoulders, TJ, in terms of the prep and coordination. So if that was the will of the rest of the subcommittee, I would be willing to serve in that role. I'd also like to add to this discussion a discussion about additional subcommittee members who I think we should explore bringing on. And there's two names that I want to put forward. I mean, one is, we have talked about, at first, I would say we have now had two really impressive presentations. First from the Just Transitions Committee, an evening session that they hosted, and then earlier this week's Climate Council meeting from Professor Bindu Panikar, who's presenting on a lot of the community research that she's been doing. And I would love to, given her expertise in community engagement across the state and the perspective that she brings, if she'd be willing to explore it. I think that her and her work would be an incredible possible addition for us to consider. And then I would also say that in terms of economics expertise, I know we have the great expertise of the state's economic research analyst, and Ken Jones is here today, which is great, but I think he doesn't like being called an economist. And it would be helpful to, I think, go back and add some additional capacity from that side of things. And one of the names that I'm aware of, I haven't had the chance to talk to him about it yet. I don't know if others have. I know Jane had thought of the same name, is Professor John Isham, who's an economist at Middlebury, who is really engaged in these issues and brilliant. And so anyway, I think I just want to round out this conversation that I think it shouldn't just be about kind of moving around chairs, but also, especially as we engage consultants and we're going to get more into the substance and content of the work, and some subject matter expertise could really be, directly applied into the work plan going forward. Those are a couple of things that I wanted to float and consider, both because we already had a seat open for someone with expertise as an economist, and because we now have another kind of opening with Leslie and not planning to attend every meeting, at least.
Lou, do you have any thoughts?
I think, I certainly think we should look to expand the subcommittee membership, certainly for diversity of background and experience. That would only benefit us. We're also, fairly small in number, it seems, at any given meeting. It'd, be good to have more minds, certainly. in terms of, I think in terms of, selecting a co-chair, we certainly want to make sure that we're able to keep moving along at full speed, and to, bring somebody up to speed might take a little while, though I'm sure there'll be plenty of qualified folks. I wonder if it would be best to select somebody who's been involved with at least the subcommittee or the council work, who's familiar with the subcommittee at the very least.
All right, thanks, Lou. Richard, do you have any thoughts you want to share?
Jared has already been contributed, he and his colleagues have contributed enormously to the information that we have available to us to do our work, and has been acting in a leadership role in the committee without title anyway. I don't know how much more time commitment it would take to be co-chair than he's already committed to the subcommittee. Jane suggests that we need to have a motion on the floor. I would move that we appoint Jared to be our co-chair along with TJ.
I'd second that motion.
Okay, any objection? So there's a motion on the floor. I'm not feel like an auctioneer. I'm not used to doing this, but there's a motion in a second, and any further discussion? We had discussion. Any further discussion?
I would just echo Richard in that Jared has basically been an in-spirit co-chair, and it's really just a formalization for a lot of the lifting he's doing. So I support him.
Right. Yeah, and I put it in the chat as well that I think it's I think that's very true, and as well. So no more with no more discussion. I'll call it this way. Is there any objection to Jared getting the title for what he's already doing? Yeah, getting the title of co-chair. Hearing none, congratulations, Jared. Okay,
That's
so
just going to make you write minutes, I assume.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for those kind words, and I'll do my best to do well by the committee, and only do this as long as you will all give me your unvarnished feedback about ways that things can be improved in terms of facilitation and agendas, and I'll look to support you and look forward to working with you in between the meetings as well, TJ.
Great, thanks, Jared. And that goes for me too. I'm very open to feedback on how these meetings are going. Okay, so I don't want to lose the thread that Jared you brought up earlier on subcommittee members. You had a couple of suggestions there in the chat. I think Dr. Panikar, it sounds like Jane has spoken with her, and she's able to kind of attend subcommittee meetings, as she's able, but and audit it, but not necessarily be a subcommittee member. Is that correct?
Well, no, I meant to say that she was very interested in the idea and was willing to attend a meeting in order to sort of get a flavor and then hopefully commit to being on the subcommittee. So I will invite her to your next meeting based on that. And then I also just wanted to add that, as we wrap up the RFP for the technical analysis needed around the mitigation component of the climate action plan, it feels clear that we're going to start to think about a municipal vulnerability index with rural resilience and adaptation. And, the hardest and heaviest lift around that sort of is around like the criteria and framing of what that could look like. And, she alluded to this in her presentation on Monday that, much of the data isn't there even for some components of that. So it'd be really, I see her relative expertise as on those social components as well as the technical analysis being really relevant to sort of this next chapter of work that we think about, as well as engagement. So, and helping us craft strategies and recommendations around how we would do a municipal vulnerability index, and what we would need as data for that long term if we don't have it ready for this climate action system. So yeah, she'd be really great. And then thinking about the economist, yeah, I'd be interested to hear from all of you how we still feel like that the relative nature of that experience coming on board, especially as we start to think about the implementation of the technical analysis contract. And maybe, you know, Jared, I saw your comment about Linda in the chat. You know, maybe that's okay that we sort of keep Linda apprised of ongoing work, and hope that she can join us late summer, early fall, which is as we're going to be like consuming the economic analysis and thinking about what it means. And maybe that timing is actually okay.
Okay. So it sounds like, correct me, Jane, but it sounds like then we would want to invite Professor Panikar to the next meeting of the subcommittee, and I'll check in with Linda. I know she's away for the next couple of weeks, but the next time I speak with her, I'll ask her about that. I also feel like my hope is that in this next, it feels like a lot of the early stage of our committee has been about like getting it started, figuring out processes, figuring out the work plan. And I feel like now that we've got those tasks identified and we're going to be getting into the substance of the work, including with the consultant, it'll hopefully be more gratifying for subcommittee members. But I think it'll also be possible to do something like we've done on the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, which is when those task groups are trying to, you know, dive deep on a specific question, they're sometimes, you know, having meetings with folks who aren't subcommittee members, so where they can ask them very specifically about one piece of feedback on an idea. So my hope would also be that there's going to be engagement opportunities for folks, even if they're not kind of a full subcommittee member, that relate to as we go through doing our work plan and our tasks.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And just to reiterate, I think the economic analysis really doesn't start happening until the end of August, and so that skill set is probably a little less critical in the near term. Okay, so it sounds like we have a plan there to kind of hold on the economic skill set and then to invite Dr. Panikar for the next meeting. Great. Thank you all, and congratulations again, Jared. So next up is updates from other committees and some miscellaneous council updates. So I guess I will turn to the appointed liaisons to provide updates. Jay, do you want to go first?
Yep. So the Rural Resilience Committee focused on two things, and one was Green Mountain Power's resilience tool, and it's something that they've developed more on a town level, looking at their assets, looking at communication infrastructure to understand where the most vulnerable communities are and the investments that they are making for improving, you know, reliability on their lines. And that was received well. There's clearly lots of good data they're willing to share. That'll be part of this work. And then the second thing was a report out from the state of Maine, and on very similar work. Basically, there was one committee member that said, let's just put Vermont and cross out Maine on the work. So there was a lot of great work that Maine has done in a lot of these areas, and that was presented very well by someone who's led that project there. I'm forgetting his name right now, sorry. But a lot of things that we don't need to necessarily reinvent the wheel on. So I think it'll be good for us to just keep our eye on some of the reports that are out and information that has been done from a process standpoint, and also just making sure that we're doing methods reasonably similarly, and data sets and approaches that are modern and appropriate, I would say. So those are the two big things from the committee. Jane, is anything else that I'm missing there?
Yeah, I just thought I'd follow up on the relative nature to science and data. So that municipal vulnerability index is sort of rising to the top, like I just suggested earlier, around like something that at first we were thinking perhaps that for this climate action plan, we'd be thinking about really a strategy around proposing a methodology to create one, recognizing that we might not have enough time to actually create it for this plan. But apparently after that meeting last week, Mike Burke reached out to Catherine, and I learned today that Green Mountain Power reviewed more closely what Maine did for their tool, and essentially said that it's exactly the same as Green Mountain Power's, except adding in a layer of understanding town capacity for planning, which is that overlay around like what can towns do from a capacity standpoint to actually implement resiliency measures. And so Mike Burke was actually going to look into their Department of Energy contract that they grant that they have, and see if Green Mountain Power could just do what Maine did with theirs and do it for us. So I thought that was really great. And I think that there would be a space perhaps for us to have a discussion around that in science and data. And that just sort of raises a question for me more around process and role of this subcommittee in considering further technical analysis needed, because I know Ag and Ecosystems has some interest in further technical analysis as well. And they're going to put that out to their subcommittee on Friday to consider within their task leads, to then batch there and prioritize what their additional technical analysis needs are by next Friday. And so maybe there's some component of vetting that within the subcommittee in an appropriate way to make a recommendation for the highest priority needs still for this climate action plan and what is further out down the road. So I just mentioned that to think about how we use the subcommittee to vet that further analysis needed. And then just for folks' interest for rural resilience, they've decided to take a pause this week from their meeting, and it's largely because they want to rethink their work plan, task areas, and how they break out the work and then present it to their subcommittee next week. And we had a really good meeting this morning about how to break their work into buckets and how far to go, because their work plan was too focused on like their statutory requirements and not like the big thinking of resiliency buckets of work. And I thought the main presentation really helped them frame sort of the why, like why do we need to think about resiliency planning, and then that'll ultimately tie into the climate work and climate assessment and all of that. So I think they're finally sort of breaking through a blockage in that subcommittee, so which is great.
That's great. Hopefully we can be on that path too. I kind of had a question on the as well on the relative nature of our work, and I guess it's it sounds like Green Mountain Power has data that is available for 75% of the state, but are there kind of data needs that we need to identify and pursue, or that we might consider recommending for improvement? Or is that the role of the resilience subcommittee? Or are they seeing that as their role to say, hey, we need this data, and then eventually we will say, oh, this is how we'll go get it? The order of operations is unclear to me, I guess.
Yes. We're going to look at your work plan today, right?
Yes.
It would be, it would be good for me to refresh my memory about like how, like the role of beyond the greenhouse gas inventory and climate work of like what you've identified in the work plan around timing of other topics and data needs for other subcommittees.
Yeah, I don't know that we've identified this particular type of data need for resilience planning. I think we've identified it as a subset of climate adaptation, but not not on its own and not kind of the town level planning capabilities. We've got some allusion to it in terms of we need better town level data or regional data, but not specific to this. So when we pull that up, I guess we could talk about that more.
Jane, just a question on the Rural Resilience Subcommittee. To what degree are they looking at utility infrastructure? Is that something that's been discussed at any great length yet?
Maybe I could jump in on that, just based on last week's conversation, and just trying to summarize it. Looking at overhead mileage of lines, looking at asset conductor types, looking at tree trimming practices clearly were part of this. That was my read on this as part of their resiliency analysis that's been done. Lou, I think those were the big ones, and communication systems was part of this as well. And I don't know exactly how they got some of that information or data, because they don't necessarily aren't a communication provider everywhere, but maybe through some of their pole agreements and leases on poles, they have some information on communication infrastructure as well. It seemed like it wasn't much deeper than that, and there was a little bit of work on some microgridding as well as kind of a case study of like how microgrids can help with resilience, but it sounds like that hasn't gotten far anywhere fast.
Sure. Okay. No, that's good to hear, and I guess we'll hear more about how their work plan changes over time.
Richard, go ahead.
TJ, I've not been thinking about resiliency at all, so excuse me if this seems half-baked, but surely there's a public health component to resiliency, both for mass climate migration, which I view as likely a slow motion emergency over a period of years, and for epidemics that may be facilitated by either climate change or mass migration, or the combination of the two. Now, we've learned a lot about the resilience or lack of resilience of the public health system in the United States in the last year and a half, and where it's strong and where it is liable to break. So I hope that our public health colleagues from the Vermont Department of Health are involved in these conversations about climate resiliency. And there are some potentially very large events, although they may be slow motion large events, but very large events, much greater than, say, a doubling of the incidence of Lyme disease, or even a tripling of the incidence of Lyme disease, which is a manageable issue. But large-scale epidemics of mosquito-borne or vector-borne disease, or of the diseases of crowding, shigellosis, salmonellosis, giardiasis, influenza, chickenpox, large-scale epidemics of those could really stretch public health resources, as we've learned.
Yeah, so understanding that the Department of Health's capacity over the short term is really limited here, I wonder if this is an area we should be thinking about for further technical assistance as well. Because I think they'll be able to kind of drop in and provide feedback, but not be taking and tell us what's available, but not be taking a real super active role in the next several months.
Yeah, the department has transitioned to contracting a lot of the epidemic mop-up work to contractors, and they're restoring their normal level of activity as they pull people back from their COVID response into their usual responsibilities. That transition isn't complete yet, but they're in a very different place than they were a couple of months ago.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to take a little time, and I don't know, you know, how much time we have, honestly. So let's again, I think this is, we've already identified in these updates 2 areas where we need to, when we pull up the work plan, to actually think about in a little more detail, of what we might need from a technical consultant, maybe in addition to what we've already scoped out for the one that's about to be hired.
Fair enough.
Don't let us forget to come back to that, or the resilience piece, please. Okay, so thank you, Jay. Jared, do you want to, is there an update from the cross sector? I think their meeting is tomorrow, but
Yeah, and we had our last meeting, I think the day after the last Science and Data Subcommittee meeting. So we had a very similar exercise of hearing from the public engagement consultants, and went through that with them, and then a good presentation from Colin about the recently released state greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and some discussion there. I think I defer to Jane, although I'm going to talk a little bit slowly to give her a chance to get back to her computer. That one of the things that we identified, that has, I think, been identified council-wide benefit, and the steering committee has discussed a little bit as well, and Jane can speak more to, is the benefit of having a common template as we look ahead to the climate action plan, and what recommendations, kind of what form they get presented in, so that there's some consistency and we can figure out how to categorize them and add them up. And so you know, they're working towards those subgroups or the task groups of the cross-sector mitigation committee are trying to identify you know, some of the strategies that they will recommend, and then what format they're going to put that in for discussion at some upcoming meetings. Jane, correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is that the June 10th meeting of cross-sector mitigation will focus on the initial recommendations for consideration from the transportation and agriculture and non-energy task groups. And then the following meeting, which I can't remember the date off the top of my head, would be the recommendations from the thermal sector, or I think they're calling themselves buildings, but the buildings and power task groups. I think that's mainly it.
Yeah, so thank you for that. But yes, there's now a draft template sort of circulating around for the cross sector, for rural resilience and ag and ecosystems. So we have all 3, and that'll be interesting, I think. And one of the aspects for that we revised since we looked at the template with cross sector almost 2 weeks ago now, with adding in a quantitative component to the analysis, so that for ultimately that those strategies will have to add up to the 2025 reduction requirements. And so that was added into the template as well. So yeah, a lot of work is going on there. And tomorrow we're having a substantive meeting to sort of start to think about the engineering of the climate action plan. So like, who's responsible for what components to what level of specificity, and who's actually drafting what sections, because it's going to come fast now, as I'm sure TJ has more experience with this than I do with the comprehensive energy plan and actually putting it together all and thinking, and people want to know who's responsible for what.
Mm-hmm. Right. Great, thank you both. If there's no questions there for Jared or Jane, I think I'll turn to Claire, if you're there, to talk about the Just Transitions Committee.
Sure. I can give a quick update. I did actually miss last week's meeting, so I don't know, Jane, you can fill in the gaps. I haven't rewatch the whole meeting, but that committee has been really focused on putting together that package of draft guiding principles, which I think for those who attended the Climate Council meeting, there was some discussion about that on Monday, if I read the agenda correctly. So there's a draft out, and I believe the goal based on the agenda is to finalize those tomorrow. And those have sort of the guiding principles, an initial sort of set of assessment questions for the other subcommittees to use. And for the subcommittee, there is a subset of the questions focused on both funding and data. So thinking about data that various policies or recommendations may require. And then in terms of the other update, I did reach out to the co-chairs about getting feedback on the work plan. And so the goal or the plan is for me to raise that at tomorrow's subcommittee meeting and identify a couple of volunteers who might be willing to get together for a call to talk through the materials that are there and think about how the work of science and data might support just transitions. And I reached out to TJ, who would probably participate in that, but if anyone else wanted to be part of that, definitely be welcome from my perspective. So yeah. I don't know.
That was great, Claire. And I'll just say that one of the hesitations of why the guiding principles and that body of work wasn't released last week, besides editorial issues, was really around hoping that tomorrow night they would think about a plan on how they'd roll those out to subcommittees and provide sort of capacity and training around the implementation of those. So stay tuned, so to speak.
Yeah.
So do you see that as something that's likely to happen for our next meeting? It sounds like there's a desire to have kind of a smaller group to talk about how that might interact, but then we want to bring that to our full subcommittee meeting so that there's that training and capacity, as you put it, Jane. So do we see that as a well, just what's the timing of that? I guess I think in my mind, I see it as somebody from Just Transitions coming and talking with us, helping us understand the principles and how to apply them.
Yes. So if you guys are meeting bi-weekly, I'm wondering still if that's like a standing thing now. I can't remember. But if it's bi-weekly, certainly at your next meeting, they'd be ready.
Okay. I'm not sure if we'll talk about that later on. I feel like we're pushing a lot of things to later on, but we'll talk about that a little later on. I'm just making a note to not forget. Okay. And I feel like I'm missing a subcommittee: transitions, cross-sector, resilience, and adaptation.
Ag.
No, ag. Thank you. I can't recall who our liaison, if we had one, was, or was it just Lauren Oates through cross-sector and then kind of through Jared? Was that how we were engaging with ag?
Yeah, you guys don't have somebody sitting in on that one. I don't think, but they're sort of chipping away very similarly as cross-sector right now in sort of building back a schedule for them to have their task leads step up and present the strategies. They have 5 task areas that they've broken their work into, but one of them being the carbon budget, so a little different, not developing strategies necessarily, but thinking about the carbon budget. And so those 4, they're going to present their sort of work plan for the next 6 to 8 weeks on how they're going to get to their final decisions. And they have a little bit more of a contentious subcommittee, I would say, than any of the other subcommittees. And so they're going to have a substantive conversation about what the process will be for prioritizing strategies and coming to agreement on the package of strategies tomorrow ahead of that, because I think they just want to make sure they sort of set ground rules for that conversation because they anticipate some disagreement perhaps among subcommittee members.
Great.
That's it, I think, for them.
Thanks, Jane. And as we get to the work plan, I'll note that Lauren did review our work plan and provided some comments, mainly with regard to kind of land use planning and data associated with how the use of land in Vermont is changing. If you saw the work plan, you will have seen those edits put in, and I commented on the side, but really looking at that relationship between private and public lands and how that might be changing from farmland to development or what have you. So, and what data gaps there are. I mean, I took it as a specific request as, you know, we need to help identify what those data gaps are and recommend a path for filling them. Or fill
They have
them.
a lot of great presentations coming up that they've also been thinking about on their agenda. And I actually think, you know, VNRC has done, in partnership with Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, has done a lot of that thinking around land use and data. And so, like, I am curious about gaps there, if they are real or not. And VNRC is going to come in and present, as well as Vermont Conservation Design, which is sort of the roadmap for ecological resiliency that the ANR has adopted as a roadmap that was done in partnership, private and public partnership, that map. So yeah, they have a lot of scientific presentations coming up that will hopefully inform like what there is for data out there also in the coming weeks on their agenda.
Great, thank you. I wonder if we should be assigning somebody to specifically review that, review those materials or the presentations at least for the ag sector, because it seems like there's a lot of, just like with all the sectors or all the committees, there's a lot of need for us to be really aware of what's going on and to provide what is needed in terms of recommendations on data.
Julie's not here, so I'm going to say Julie should do it, only because a lot of that data is in her agency and maybe not necessarily sit in, but she can certainly speak. I don't know. Julie and I should talk about that.
Okay, we'll have that as a takeaway. And yeah, if it's not Julie, but she could obviously assign some staff to do it. So, great. Okay, and then just miscellaneous council updates. What I had in mind here, Jane, is just an update on the status of the technical consultant process.
We've been negotiating the draft contract internally, and it's been on my plate. And since Megan's here, I can use this as a status update from me to Megan O'Toole, who's the attorney helping us with the contract. It's in my bucket to sort of hand off to Megan for her to do the legal review of the draft contract, and I had hoped to do that by the end of last night and haven't done it yet, and hope to do it by tonight. So I'm still hopeful that we'll have the contract signed or go out to the selected consultant by the end of the week for their review. As well, the way that the proposal was put together, it was really clear and easy to move it into a contract. So my hope is that there won't be the internal strife within the agency the way there was around the communications and outreach contract that stalled us for so long. Right now it's just stalling because of my own capacity, not because of the challenge to draft it.
I'm certainly sympathetic there. So that it seems like, oh, go ahead,
Sorry,
Jared.
I was just going to ask Jane if you have a sense, and maybe this is an unfair question, but just kind of a best case scenario versus a more likely scenario of when they'd be on board, just so we have a sense of like when we should be planning to get any information to them that would be helpful, begin conversations, start planning science and data subcommittee agendas around kind of introductions and getting up to speed with them. Is it, yeah. Sorry.
Megan can check me if I'm totally wrong, but once we send it to them, I don't expect, we're not changing anything substantively in their proposal. We're just moving it into a contract. So again, it's just this holdup on me right now to do that. But once we do that, I don't expect negotiations to stall or have a problem. So it should move pretty quickly, which quickly means like could be on board by the end of next week. The signatures have routed in on the other two once we've gotten to that place within 24 to 48 hours from AOA and everybody. So once it's out of A&R and with the consultant, it should move quickly.
Great. Well, so I
think I've shared this perhaps with Jared, but maybe I'll share it with all of you just quickly, is that for TJ's benefit too, is, you know, the proposal that we selected was the lowest cost by far of the 4 proposals that we received. And if they didn't come with sort of glowing recommendations from people who have worked with them, you might have even thought perhaps they weren't understanding the questions we were asking because, you know, the cost was low. But we built in headroom in all areas in the contract or scope of work through conversation and revisions to that proposal with them to hopefully have space that as questions come up or we evolve or want other things done, that we'll have capacity in the contract to do that with them. And that's the expectation that we've set up with them. That was sorely needed in the carbon budget, but I'll just suggest for all of your interests, I also got a lot of feedback from the transportation task leads in cross-sector about their concern about perhaps maybe not enough expertise on that team to think about systems with transportation. That the expertise really on the team maybe lied more focused around electrification and EVs, but not like big thought process for transportation. So we also built in capacity there, and I think some of those components of the work with them, we're going to have to work out pretty quickly to make sure they have the right team still once they get going.
Great. Well, I was going to ask the same question that Jared did, but thinking that, you know, I think as now the two of us as co-chairs would be looking to reach out as soon as possible to kind of get, you know, as we'll see in the work plan coming up in a minute here, is that a lot of the questions we have to be answered, you know, the how is listed as technical consultant. So we need, we definitely want to move forward on that. So I saw Jared's thumbs up, so it's accepting my volunteering him. Thank you. And unless
TJ,
anybody
if
else,
you don't mind me putting,
go ahead.
If you don't mind me putting you on the spot, TJ, I was wondering if you could also provide any update about the LEAP modeling with SEI and NESCOMs, just so that feels like the other piece to just kind of be aware of in terms of timeline and how things fit together.
That is on the agenda for today, specifically,
sorry.
we could do it now if folks want to move it up.
Wait until we actually get there. My bad that I missed that.
No, that's all right. Why don't we just wait a second on that, because I also I put you providing an update on the EAN pathways too on the agenda, so hope you're prepared for that.
Yes.
So, but I do want to just get into the work plan and pull that up just to remind folks of where we are and what it is. We're running a little behind schedule, but I think we can catch up in the energy plan updates. I didn't open the floor. Are there any other questions on the miscellaneous updates or the technical consultant? So, sorry, I have too many files open. I'm trying to pull up the work plan here. Bear with me. Okay. Make this a little bigger for folks. So hopefully everybody had a chance to take a look at this, the work plan here. The edits are edits from last time you saw it. I sent this out, I think a week ago, and then sent it again with all of the materials on Monday night. And so we'll see the edits. Some of them I talked about, but just to recap, we have kind of the topics of greenhouse gas inventory, LEAP modeling, and then data availability and use I added here. Climate data modeling, impact of climate change on humans in the kind of human dimensions and health category, social cost of carbon, benefit cost analysis, and then tracking and data. One thing I wanted to point out is this data and availability and use. Lauren's comment on land use, she kind of was attuned to it from this section that said identification of data needs to improve in the future. And so, that's to the point I was talking about earlier, but really it highlighted for me that this is really a whole topic onto itself, and it's separate from LEAP modeling. So unless there's objections, I think we should just actually kind of separate this. And I know it's kind of maybe pedantic to do that, but I think it's important to be clear on what we're trying to do also. So I guess I'm gonna stop and see if there's any need for a refresher, or if anybody has comments on the changes that were here, and then we can start to talk about some of the issues that we brought up earlier.
Can I just add something about the human dimensions and health piece? You give a brief discussion. You have 5 bullet points of the health concerns. Can you scroll back up to where that's on the screen? Number 5. Yeah, thank you. I'm sure you didn't intend this to be an exhaustive list.
Correct.
But I'm very concerned about human migration and its health impact and social impact. And I think that it's worth continuing to conceptually make a distinction between health impacts that are due to global climate change that we have no direct control over here in Vermont, and health impacts that are susceptible to being improved or worsened by what we do as part of our climate action. So, if we replace gasoline-powered vehicles with electric vehicles, we will reduce air pollution, and we will have beneficial we will have beneficial health effects from the reduced air pollution. And that's something that's in our control. That's not something driven by global climate change itself. We have the opportunity to actually improve health over the baseline.
Right. I think that's a very important distinction, and this is certainly not intended to be an exhaustive list, and we can add that. I would do it live, except I pulled out a PDF version, not the Word version.
It's
so
all right.
I'm not gonna.
It's all right. I trust you.
Yeah. This is good, because what I will do is send it around, and I'll try and send it to you first, Richard, to see if I've captured it. Or actually, why don't I do it this way? I'm gonna flip it in terms of the Word versions have been sent out previously. And I can send that again to you if you want, but if you want to make edits to this and then send them back to me,
I will find the Word
specifically.
version. I will find the Word
Okay.
version.
Okay, let me know if you can't find it, and I will I can send it again. But it would be great because that way I won't, we can be sure that you're getting in there what you're intending, and then the next meeting, we'll see if anybody has any questions or objections to that.
Thanks for listening.
And if I can just clarify, I want to make sure I've got this right, or I'm on the same page with everybody. It feels to me like this task number 5 is about the impact of climate change. So like things that we have perhaps less control over, and it's like the modeled effects on human health of how Vermont's climate is expected to change in certain ranges. This other question of the modeling with for instance, the LEAP exercise, comparing like business as usual energy use to, if we meet sectoral targets around emissions reduction, feels to me like that other question you were bringing up, Richard, about how to improve health from a baseline by things that we do have control over, that would show up in that different task around the assessment of health effects or likely health improvements, but to be agnostic about it, the health effects of what we're modeling in terms of the change in the LEAP model. So I feel like I can't see, sorry, TJ, I'm looking at your screen rather than having it up, but I feel like it's worth just noting that distinction, that there's health kind of analysis that is, I understand, to be baked into the work plan that divides along those lines in different tasks. And I think, is that 3? Because in the RFP and in the respondents, they were basically going to take that LEAP model and then plug that into there were some different kind of health modeling tools that exist to say, well, if you're, you have this many fewer heavy duty vehicles using fossil fuel by X date, then you could expect this level of improvement in terms of respiratory health, for instance. So I feel like that is going to be included in task 3, those kind of things that we have more control over and that are more of the health effects of the strategies and actions that we pursue.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I can't pull that out of the language in the table, but you stated it more clearly.
Right, and I'll just clarify that the LEAP model itself will not do that.
Right.
That's the kind of additive task that needs to happen. So it
and maybe it's like review LEAP modeling and resulting or attendant modeling that's built on it to do other assessments, including the economic and health assessments that were in the RFP.
right.
And just to pick up, Jared, I'm glad you're agnostic, because I have some concerns that if we encourage people to burn wood at home for heat, that we may actually worsen indoor air quality on the average, depending on how they do it.
Yeah, how is a big question. I think it's also possible to expand wood heat and improve health outcomes by, if we do stove changeouts and get a lot of those old, very dirty pre-EPA certified stoves out of people's homes.
You mean like the one that had a fire in yesterday morning at our camp?
Oh,
It was installed in the 70s.
This is foreshadowing, but some of you who've looked through the EAN report, this is the particulates that come from those old pre-88 wood stoves. If you compare to the modern, much more efficient wood stoves, the particulate pollution is a lot lower and a lot better for human health. So if we're installing efficient and modern wood heating equipment, it'd be a lot better than what we used to do.
So this gets to one of the questions that I wanted to bring up, is just how are we going to examine this? And so it, for the second piece, which we just talked about, is like the review of the kind of not just the LEAP model, but the attendant models with it. That is kind of a technical consultant analysis, potentially, it sounds like. Subcommittee discussion and recommendation. We have not talked about the one that's listed here on the screen, the human dimensions in health, and how we were going to, tackle that. think Richard, you explained it well, and I think you'll kind of maybe reframe the words here a little bit, but the question is really, how are we going to tackle that? And right now, that I don't think that is on anybody's to-do list.
One of resilience buckets of work is community resilience. And, community resilience is intended to be sort of all encompassing. And they're definitely thinking about public health there, but I don't really know to what extent. And it probably warrants a conversation. And that's the intent of this pause in their work, is to kind of come up with folks who are going to be in charge of those buckets. So maybe there'll be a need to coordinate with that person as they are tasked with that work.
So that seems very, see, maybe we just can't answer the question now, but I'm left wanting a little more in that, if they're coming up with, it's in our charge to kind of understand and respond to these health impacts of climate change, there still needs to be, what are the health impacts of climate change, and how are we going to that's the kind of information that it seems like we need to create or sign off on or provide to the resilience committee so they can act on it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can see the chat, but that distinction makes a lot of sense to me. And then Claire just spoke to Dr. Panikar's experience and how she would have some really good ideas in that area, I think, also if she joined the subcommittee. Or even if not, we could pull her in for certain topics of conversation in addition to the Department of Health employees that we all, Jared and David.
Right.
We think a lot about that.
So I guess I'd like to see if there's any volunteers from staff or subcommittee members to reach out to Dr. Panikar and probably Jared Ulmer at the Department of Health, or if it's David Grass at the Department of Health, to see if we can flesh this out a little bit for our next meeting. And if it's not clear what this is, I can try and capture it again.
Well, I'll be happy to reach out to the Department of Health staff, but I need to have clarity about what I'm asking them. I mean, I know what I would ask them, but I don't know what the committee would ask them.
Right. So what I think it is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what I heard, is we need to understand the impact of climate change writ large on Vermonters, on the human health, the health of Vermonters, and how do we, what information is available and what is the best path to get it? How do we bring that information forward for the council and likely the resilience committee so that they can come up with recommendations of what to do about it?
Okay, well, that's fine. I mean, I will try to track down Jared Ulmer and talk to him. I always enjoy talking to public health colleagues, and I'll see what I can figure out.
Great, thank you, Richard. Jared's great too. So I know you've talked with him before. So
no, I have not actually.
Oh,
So,
you haven't? I thought you had. Oh,
I'm
okay.
looking forward to meeting you.
Okay. If you want, I could do an email introduction for you. If
That'd
that's
be cool.
easier.
That'd be
Yeah.
cool. Thank you.
Yep.
I took a
Okay,
quick
and-
look at the natural hazard mitigation plan that Jay Schaefer sent me a link to. And I mean, I just looked at the table of contents basically, and a couple of the tables. And it does not appear to address mass migration as a hazard. But they may have done that separately in some other context.
Great. Well, yeah, I mean, I think we need to, it's possible that there's data and information available about some of the impacts on Vermonters of climate change, but not every aspect. And in that case, I think it's on us to just identify that gap and say, here's a plan to fill it. Or do we need to fill it? And then if so, here's a plan to fill it.
Yep.
Okay, great, thank you. The other piece of the work plan I wanted to talk about is it specifically is the climate data modeling and projections. And this again is I think we may have a better sense of what it is exactly we need, projections of what the climate will look like over time going forward. And so I guess I'm going to look to Jay to see if one, I characterize that right, and two, what our approach should be going forward to get that information, have presentations to us, kind of internalize it, and make recommendations of what we think.
Yep. Yeah. So sure, TJ. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep. So I think a lot of this comes down to the second bullet there, which is collaborate with other subcommittees on thresholds, hazards, extreme events to fully capture the resilience of people, landscape, and agriculture. So starting out with understanding the risk and how it relates to what's currently happening is, before we could look forward, we kind of have to look to what's happening now and understanding those hazards. And I think about it as a risk assessment, in that you evaluate risk of something as how frequent it occurs and how intense it might be. And then you accumulate that through some time. I was just doing a little exercise and trying to break this down into different hazards there. And I'm happy to do a little more work and present a few more better baked ideas on this, but the hazards are weather and climate here. So I want to be careful about us lumping it all together. Extreme weather events are things that are really easy to kind of put your finger on. Power outages, for example, right? Storms. That's weather, and that's a synchronous hazard, right? So there's two classes of hazards here that I'm proposing how we think about this. The second class of hazard really is climate and climate change, and that's more asynchronous. And that's getting to a lot of things that get a lot fuzzier. So, but a clear example of that might be like drought. All right, you have seasonal shifts in precipitation that might cause more drought for agricultural applications. Right, so I propose to break this into extreme weather and climate categories, and then breaking it into those three different areas for people's, landscapes, and agriculture. That's kind of number one here, TJ. And number two is, what data and climate models are we going to use for this, and to pull into to have some informed decisions with all of these risks. So we understand the risks. We know the highest risk is probably something related to flooding. All right, that's pretty well documented. And then what could we say about our confidence in future risk based on the modeling from that? So the modeling can almost be very specific to each hazard. There's not just a one-size-fits-all approach to this, but there's also a lot of diminishing returns of effort because the science is too fuzzy on it too. So 30 years from now, if we want to understand how many ice storms we might get, they're just too infrequent of a hazard to really say a whole lot about that's actionable. So TJ, I guess to summarize this, I would say I see this, my role and our role here is to prioritize the risks, the known threats here, and trying to look at where we put, invest our efforts over different time horizons, understanding those different risks and thinking about them as extreme weather bucket and also the climate shifts and the seasonal shifts. I'm going to pause there because that was a lot that I just went through, and I'd start to put together a little Excel sheet there, but it got too complicated. I thought I would just run it by everyone here for feedback. And maybe I'm getting too much into the weeds, or does that help us move a little forward on that?
I think it's really helpful to hear that outline, Jay, and how you're framing it. It sounded great to me, and I learned a lot there. One piece of context that I'd ask either you to speak to, or if there's anyone else on this call that can speak to, this is going to Jane's good question in the chat, is feels like a lot of these questions are going to be treated and addressed in the Vermont climate assessment. I spoke with one of the folks who's drafting the energy chapter. It sounds like they're aiming for a summer publication. Does anyone have an update about both the kind of timeline for that and what kind of information will be in there that we think will be relevant for us, that we can just kind of say, okay, this has been studied and addressed in the Vermont climate assessment, versus what we anticipate or we'll have to wait to see is missing from there that needs to be added to meet what we've identified in the work plan.
So Secretary Moore, Julie and I met with Jillian and Stephen from the Gund Institute last week about this, and thinking about how we start to fold their work into the Climate Council work, recognizing that, I mean, a lot of it we can take sort of verbatim and move into the our climate action plan. So they're starting to roll out policy briefs in particular on their different chapters, and they're coming to meet with Ag and Ecosystems next week, specifically on some of the components that overlap with their work. But they plan to roll out the full Vermont climate assessment in July, and wanted to come to the full Climate Council in July to sort of speak to that report and think about how it dovetails with the climate action plan. So I suspect, you know, the way that they are thinking about rolling out these different components with subcommittees, that there's some overarching rollout with this subcommittee in particular, especially around the climate science and what we take and build into, you know, Jay, like I imagine your role and Leslie Ann's still role as a council member, it's sort of that upfront sort of case building in the climate action plan about the effects of climate change in Vermont, where we're sort of setting the stage for the need for emissions reductions. And I imagine a lot of that's going to be in the Vermont climate assessment and how we think about what we use from that. And yes, so the timing is really great on the Vermont climate assessment, just that they are sort of in that final proofing and editing right now and have these policy briefs that they want to start testing with people.
Yep. I think there's a lot of great overarching narrative, but oftentimes that just doesn't get a little deeper. And how deep do we go with the work here is how, and around the resilience, this is more around, less around emissions components and more around resilience and the built landscape. But yeah, there's a lot of pieces out there that are, I think, need to be put together, and there's a lot of new science developing here too. So there's just not always information that's actionable for some of this. And then just looking at a temperature graph, and the temperatures are getting warmer, like that doesn't tell you much about a lot of things. Looking at extreme precipitation events and trying to understand those for flooding risks, like that's really something that's valuable, but it's a pretty big stretch scientifically to have a high level of confidence in a result like that. So anyway, I'm just showing that as an example, and you just have to be mindful of that. And I guess I'm signing myself up for all of those ugly details in a lot of ways.
That's great. Yeah, this is really helpful, Jay. Thank you. It sounds like you were working on something like an Excel spreadsheet that breaks this out and gives a little more detail, or maybe even kind of narrows a little bit, or maybe specifies is a better word, the focus of what's in number 4 here. And I think that would be great to kind of tee up and send around to the committee for thoughts.
Okay, yeah, And Rural Resilience had started to come up with some of this too, so I'll try to pull in as much as I can from the big picture here.
Great. And I do think we do need to kind of, it sounded like you were breaking it into two pieces, but then there's also the climate assessment, which is a third piece. That's that higher overarching, maybe that's not the right word, but maybe 30,000 foot level that is, we need to, I think, have a plan to incorporate that. And,
Yeah.
and maybe that, yeah.
What I would summarize is that the climate assessment, a lot of the existing literature is pretty good at looking at those asynchronous effects, more the climate seasonal shifts.
Got it.
And it's less good at understanding extreme event behavior. That's because of limitations in the science. That's how I would summarize that.
Thank you. That's helpful. That was simple for my simple mind. Okay, great. So I think we have a path forward here, which so for both of these items, and that was my hope in looking at the work plan today. Do folks have other comments or things they want to add to these or other items on the work plan? Or I did send around some draft questions that are kind of more specific questions for certain items. That there was a couple of minor changes there, but I don't know if you can see this document now, but okay. So I'm hearing no other comments or on the work plan. I think we made some good progress on those two items, so thank you. So if we go back to the agenda, next up on the agenda is some public comment. I want to open the floor for a public comment on really it's subcommittee composition and the plan and that we talked about today, and then also the work plan. And keep in mind that in the last hour, we'll talk about the greenhouse gas inventory, and there'll be public comment on opportunity on that afterwards. George, I saw your hand first.
Hi. Thanks for the opportunity to comment. When you were stepping through the recent conversation about resilience and preparing for contingencies that aren't necessarily synchronous, they're asynchronous, one that I think might show up is a possibility of supply chain breakages. For example, you might have a breakage in medical supplies. It's fairly global what we import into the state, and things that happen elsewhere could do extreme things to the supply chain in ways we wouldn't even think of as being possible. I think COVID pandemic, for what it's worth, has some good lessons to be learned. You know, look at how our food chain supply broke during the early phases of this emergency, and it was possible other areas we could also break as well, for other reasons, whether it be wars or economic crises. So I'm thinking that the planning you're doing for climate is actually a little more broader in scope than you might realize, or if you were to think of it in terms of dominoes, where one causes another to move. No, it's look at your perspective a little more globally and just Vermont. Something I
Can I ask a question on that, George? Can I ask a question and follow up? So I understand your point, I think, and just giving the example of, you know, global pandemic or climate change causes kind of the easier spread of pathogens, leads to global pandemic, leads to supply chain breakages, for instance. And it could be more direct than that for like based on weather, climate, you know, et cetera. I'm not sure how, and I don't know if you have thoughts on this, on how we should get, what this subcommittee should do in terms of the work plan we were just talking about, and how, we pull information up, who it's for, and how they might use it. I mean, it sounds like that might be part of the resilience committee, but our role would be, identifying the data or identifying gaps in the data. And so, or is it really focused to how those weather events may also create supply chain shortages, and we should account for that also?
So I guess if I was looking at local to Vermont, what can you do about this? The obvious choices are contingency planning with stockpiling, basically doing what I call use cases. In other words, you do scenario evaluations and decide what pieces of your existing, taken for granted, everything's working, sunny day conditions would look different if you were to say, I mean, I'll give you an example that's going on right now. I have a crown that's supposed to arrive at my dentist, and it appears to be a supply chain issue. So I have a temporary crown in there, and I have no idea when it'll actually show up. That's pretty benign, but you can see how this could cascade into something you needed to save your life isn't on the shelf, so people start having health issues that weren't expected because they don't have the remedy on hand. One of the prescriptions I used recently in the last few months is manufactured in Israel. What if that part of the world went up in smoke with a war? That's the kind of thing that I think forward planning of this type has to kind of think about it. Throw away your assumptions and decide what the side effect ripple effects are going to be. I don't know if that answers your
Thanks.
question.
Yeah, that was helpful.
One additional one I would consider, we right now are in a drought. Our farm here, our berry farm, is tapping into its irrigation supply much earlier in the season than even a few years ago. Usually we wouldn't be doing this until July or August. And so I guess what I'm thinking about is what goes wrong when there's drought. Certainly in California, what happened was wildfires. I can't imagine we're immune to that outcome either. So that would be, as far as the forest, a major topic to investigate and chase down.
Great. Thank you, George.
Okay.
Steve.
Hi. Thanks. That was a great discussion. Very interesting to hear. It's interesting to hear how you're starting to slip into talking about those resilience issues, because I've been wondering how there's a lot of data questions and science questions that feed into the work that's probably happening in other subcommittees on resilience. But there are a few things, and actually it turns out I've been doing a lot of work with this on National Sierra Club's task force on climate adaptation for the last couple of years, mostly from a national perspective, connecting resources rather than being the experts. But there are a few things that I've heard you talking about today that I just make really brief comments or suggestions on. One, in the context of health, one thing that is missed a lot is the question of workplace health. And so how does that relate to climate change? Well, it turns out that one of the big predictions is that outdoor workers are among the most hard hit. I mean, they're usually not on somebody's front line list, but they really are. And I mean, think about it as the number of days over 90 degrees or over 100 degrees go up. There are going to be days we just can't get outside. Or if you have to get outside because you have to feed your family, you're putting yourself at risk. So there's a real equity component of that. And then you ask, well, who are the outdoor workers? And you think of farm workers and carpenters and so on. They aren't, I think the white collar workers get air conditioning in this case. And so that's something to think about from an equity perspective. And it's hard to predict, obviously, all these things. it might be worthwhile thinking about a lot of these questions in a couple of what if scenarios, not unlike the climate assessment does. Well, we might have the business as usual scenario or the maximum mitigation scenario. So what does that look like for the potential for workplace health, and how does that fit into the kind of planning that people have to do on a county-wide basis or statewide basis, or even an employer basis? So that's one thing. Another thing which George mentioned just now is about food. I think this is a big one that's underrated, I think, because you look at where we do get our food, and those places are drying up. California is one of the big ones, and the the Western Plains or the Central Plains, where we get a lot of our wheat and so on for our food chain. Not necessarily, I guess it depends on your diet, but a lot of our food comes from there. And globally, the pattern is similar, and they're saying something like a 30% drop in food productivity over the next few decades, maybe later in the century. At the same time, the population of the planet is increasing. So I think that we're going to see a crunch. They're predicting huge increases in food prices. So again, that's an equity issue, right? The people with more resources are going to be okay with that. So I think that the food lines we saw with the pandemic are something that we should consider. How can we avoid that in the future? I think that one of the big things that we can do that we will not always be able to do is preserve more land that could potentially be brought into production for food. And every time a farm field gets developed, I feel well that's land that my grandchild is not going to have to get food from. So those are a couple of biggies: workplace health and that potential food impact. And then the last thing I'll mention is kind of different, but we had a great workshop, a webinar a couple of months ago on climate and health, in which we had three great people, three women who do research, who are actively researching in the course of responding to climate-related health issues related to hurricanes and droughts and things and floods. And it turned out that their research components of their work became an active resource in terms of responding to the problem. And it really helped their process of doing research, helped connect research subjects with important services. They helped clarify what had to be done. So the comparison that I made with this is again looking at the COVID response and thinking about, well, how did active research guide how we responded to COVID? And I think that's going to continue to be an issue with climate change, because it's not, we can't predict everything. There's very little we can really predict. So that component of using, action research, I think is a phrase that's used sometimes, but it's not purely scientific, because you don't have your control groups and things like that. You're actively working with subjects and you're trying to help people at the same time. So I'm not sure how that fits into the Science and Data Committee. It's obviously related to data collection and the science that goes on with it. But I just would sort of flag those few things as components. And I'm glad to hear you focusing on this side of things. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Okay, so thank you both for public comment. I don't see any other hands up, so we move. We're about 10 minutes behind, but like I said, I think we can make some of that up, hopefully here with the status updates. And I will start with the comprehensive energy plan modeling. So the LEAP model, I'm expecting actually today to get a summary of the reference case, a near final, and I say near final because we want to share that with some committees of the Climate Council and some others in order to get feedback on this business as usual case, this reference case, what it looks like. I think that it's possible when of course you get something from a consultant, you want to do your internal review before you share it publicly. We've had a bunch of back and forth, so it's possible it could be ready like next week, but I think more likely is for 2 weeks from now. We could share that, and we could move forward there. Following sharing the reference case, some iterative feedback and maybe changes to it going forward, but the next step is to create a mitigation pathway, and this kind of dovetails with Jared's work a little bit in terms of just having a target that's not necessarily based on any policies. It's a technology pathway, but we'll see the increment from the business as usual reference case to that target. And so that we're expecting in a few weeks. So I think the current date is the 3rd week in June, but I don't want to promise that date, given that I think I promised a reference case far before today. So that's the status of that. And then following on, I think the timing of pathways being developed by policy pathways, or I guess they're policy and technology pathways, being developed by the cross-sector mitigation committee, and then our own outreach on the energy plan, which is intended to be coordinated with the Climate Council's outreach, works well in order to kind of really use those pathways as kind of the sum of the scenarios we run. I can say that I've based on discussions and feedback we had, several months ago on modeling and an initial public input request that the department put out, that TCI is going to be one of the options that we have in the base modeling. So we'll have a with and without TCI option or toggle. But beyond that, we don't know, and it could be TCI plus or whatever. But I thought I'd share that. I also just want to share broader comprehensive energy plan outreach efforts. Over the first, 3 of them are in the first 2 weeks of June and 1 in the last week of June. The department and we're coordinating with Jane and the Climate Council are reaching out to regional planning commissions and municipalities through the regional planning commissions to get their input. If you recall, our energy plan also through Act 174 is required to provide guidelines to planning commissions and municipalities for their more local energy planning. And so we're hearing directly from regional planning commissions and from municipalities on kind of what they've done, what their challenges are, what their challenges to implementation are. And those forums they're not on our website now. They will be today. I think they are open to the public, although the real intent is for the department to hear from the RPCs and munis. So that's coming up in near term. Lou, looks like you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first, I just should say that any collaboration we can have with regional planning commissions and municipalities is always a good thing, as we've learned in our work with the electric facing side of that. So that'll be good to see. My point that I wanted to make was about the scenario analysis. You just mentioned TCI is a great one to see what will happen with and without. Something else that occurs to me in a similar vein is any adjustments to the renewable energy standard, tier 2 or tier 3. any significant adjustments upward there would, obviously have a big effect.
Right. One of the things that's in, I can say one of the things that's in our contract with our contracts actually with NESCOM, Air Association of Air Regulators, who have subcontracted SEI, is to have kind of a in-state, out-of-state look for where the electric generation happens. So it's not necessarily tied to renewable portfolio standard, but we can, the intent is to better understand kind of the impacts to the impacts, whether, all that generation or a certain, we haven't decided how much, but, a bulk of generation comes in state, or if it's all, from offshore wind in Massachusetts. And so that's a great thought. And I think as we're better defining what those are, would certainly love input. So if there's no other questions on the energy plan, I did just a brief update. I'm hoping to put on our next agenda, although I'm starting to think it's going to be very packed. We might need a full day meeting. I just turn it over to Jared, because EAN's done some really good work with their annual energy report and revised pathways modeling.
Thanks, TJ. So as I think many of you know, I sent an email to the council, and I'm glad for everybody who's on this call to know we released yesterday our latest annual progress report for Vermont on emissions, energy, equity, and the economy. And this is our annual effort to really work closely with state partners and other trusted data sources to make sure that we're compiling as much good information, the latest and highest quality data that we can access. And that is thanks to the great work of the Public Service Department, the Agency of Natural Resources. TJ and Colin played roles providing data and reviewing drafts, as did Lou. Data is in there from Velco, many others. And so I'm going to put in the chat right now the link where folks can download that report. It is right now up on our website. And we're hoping to have the printed copies back and going out to folks' mailboxes, because it's a 40-page report. There's a lot of people keep it as reference and be able to flip open to it. And so if anyone would like a mailed copy, our awesome network manager, Cara Robacek, is, you can email her. I just put her email in the chat with your mailing address if you're not already on the EAN mailing list, and we'll mail you a physical copy of this report for your reference. I would also just say that we have put on the schedule 2 webinars to go through the report and then engage in Q&A about what is in it. I'm going to put that in the chat. You can register for one or the other of those webinars, either Friday, June 11th at noon or Thursday, June 17th at noon via that link. We'll do them via Zoom. I might, just call out, there is a lot in here. I don't want to take a lot of time, but I might call out a few pages and resources that I think are maybe particularly relevant. And there we have some lightning. To this committee, which would be, the skies just opened up here in Montpelier. Page 14 is an overview of different types of inventories and the comparison of in-boundary inventories versus consumption-based inventories. There's good examples and talk about global warming potential values. And there is quite a bit more, but I won't take the time to go through it now. I will say, just to pause on our work plan and this question of ongoing data gaps, I do want to note that one of my biggest frustrations in putting together this report, as we increasingly try to focus on issues of equity, is that the data sets we were using, which are often federal data sets or state data sets, whether it's the American Community Survey or the Federal Highway Administration, usually the sample sizes are large enough that we are able to disaggregate the results to enable analysis by, say, income quintile. And we can get a sense of how lower income Vermonters versus upper income Vermonters, they're, spending on heating fuels or transportation fuels, or, vehicle miles traveled, or the age of their vehicles. One of the challenges that we consistently ran into is that because of the sample sizes of a lot of those federal and state data sets, we were not able to do analysis by race. And that's primarily because, the sample sizes were so low that, it really affected the confidence interval and the potential for error in the data. And so I think that one of the things that I'm really curious to have conversations with the Just Transitions Committee, and that this subcommittee also may want to look at, we also may want to learn from what folks in the administration or in the legislature are considering, is what are ways that we can make sure that as we compile data, whether that's at a population level or program level, we are making sure we collect it in a way that allows us to have an equity lens on these questions. That's not just about income or geography, but that would also take into account potential racial disparities that we would want to be aware of and certainly work to address or correct. So that's just a note that a lot of our equity analysis in this report was limited by the data that we had, and it's mostly about wealth and income. And I think that is, as we continue this data gap conversation, something that's important for us to address via a lens of racial equity going forward in terms of data availability and how surveys are conducted and programs collect data. I know, for instance, if we look at, the weatherization data of the approximately 30,000 homes weatherized, we know how many of those were low income homes because that's how the programs are set up. We don't know how many of those homes were homes of Vermonters of color. So, I think those are some of the issues that, if we don't measure things, it's really hard to know what's happening with confidence and then work to engage with communities and policymakers to address it. So that's something that I think is really going to be important for us going forward.
Richard, you have a question?
I just have a comment. Jared, it's a brilliant piece of work, and I'm still working my way through it, but I'm enjoying it a lot. And I'm going to send you an email with a little sub-analysis I did that you may find entertaining. But I'll just comment that in my work in public health, we always had the exact opposite problem, which is that health data typically are collected by race and ethnicity often, but are not collected by income. So we had the exact mirror image data lack in our analyses, and it is really frustrating.
Thanks for that, Rich. I forgot to mention one thing that is important, and it goes to the pathways conversation. Pages 6 and 7 are the summary of our emissions reduction pathways model, the model as it existed as of April. And that, I've provided this. I actually need to send to the full committee the latest full Excel spreadsheet of that model that has all the sectoral pathways and measures that are currently modeled. I know TJ has that because he's shared it with NESCOM and SEI. But I'll share that with the rest of the committee, and also want to note that our amazing data manager at EAN, May Butler, who's the primary author of our pathways analysis, along with our senior fellow, Lee Seddon, May is working on drafting a white paper summary so that we can share kind of a more digestible, accessible document that provides an overview with some of those graphs about how the pathways model was constructed, what are some of the assumptions, what are some of the key takeaways of it. And we're hoping to have that white paper kind of drafted and ready for review, within a month. So I'm hopeful, based on hearing your time frame, TJ, that those might align well. And one of my biggest goals will just be to make sure that if there are any kind of discrepancies between kind of what our model is putting out and what we see in the either some of the inputs or outputs of the LEAP model, that we just understand why that's the case and make sure that we kind of have some sunlight around, that's the great thing, is that I think we all agree we need to have transparency on the assumptions and making sure that we're using the best inputs possible in terms of peer review and quality. So looking forward to that.
Great. Thank you, Jared. So,
sorry, TJ, one last thing. I sent this in the email to the council, and subcommittee members were included in this, but if there are a number of folks on this subcommittee who can't make either of those dates, or for whom like an evening time would work better than a daytime, I am also, and this is good for you to know as well, Jane, just in terms of conversations with other council members, I'm happy to schedule additional sessions to provide an overview and engage in discussion about the findings and analysis in the report. It doesn't have to be limited to just those two that are in the link I sent.
Great. Thanks, Jared. And I guess I almost forgot. I also put a link to the regional forums that we're having for the energy plan into the chat if folks are interested. So we have 2 items left on the agenda, is to talk, kind of take the next step on the greenhouse gas inventory information gathering and upping our game there, and then the next meeting. For the greenhouse gas inventory, I want to break this into 2 pieces. One, I want to a suggestion that was sent to me about how we can kind of move forward and elevate not only our game but other council members and the general public on the inventory. And then 2, the plan was to have Colin Smythe is prepared to talk a little bit about more kind of that the definitions of life cycle, production-based, consumption-based inventories, and what other jurisdictions are doing. And for that second one, I'm afraid that we're going to run out of time today, unfortunately. And I apologize to Colin. I already sent you a message apologizing, or tried to. In that I don't think we would be able to do it justice in this short time frame that we have left, and with everybody's bandwidth after 2.5 hours. I don't think that would be ideal. I'll start with the latter first. Are folks okay? I see you're gracious as always, Colin. Thank you in the chat. But are folks okay with postponing that discussion? Is there any objections to postponing that discussion?
No, I think that needs a chunk of time to go over.
Right. Okay. Thank you. The second piece I wanted to bring up was a suggestion I got, and it really relates to the inventory and these types of issues, but to have some of this conversation on definitional consistency, and then teeing up some of those key questions that we've teed up over the last several months on the inventory with the technical consultant and perhaps other invited stakeholders from a range of perspectives, to have a more public forum. I mean, these are very public forums, but a specific workshop per se, like the Just Transitions Committee had that evening workshop that was really great on justice issues and diversity, and something like that, where we can just have some of these issues, different perspectives heard in a forum, that we would need to plan it out really well in order to ensure it rolls off smoothly, I think we could do that. But to move that forward and really kind of help move our subcommittee move the conversation in this area. And I'll say one more thing on the timing. That's probably not like a next week thing. There's some planning, and then having the technical consultant be a big part of that and some of their recommendations on pieces. We may want to do it before they come out with their recommendations or after. I'm not sure about that, but I wanted to float the idea. I thought it had some merit, and I could see some pros and cons to it, but I just wanted to get feedback from you all here. Julie, hi.
Hi, sorry to be late joining. I just wonder if we aren't going to end up having to have the same conversation potentially twice, depending on how that goes. Just that, and I know we're going to need to have that kind of deliberative conversation as part of the subcommittee. And just like trying to think about how we appreciating that 1:30 to 4 o'clock on Wednesday afternoons isn't convenient for everyone, but just make sure we're thoughtful, I guess, about how we structure it so that we don't have to cover the same ground twice, once in the committee and then once in a more public forum.
Yeah, that's a good point. I certainly don't want to have to cover it twice. We don't have time to cover it twice. And so maybe it's framed as we just kind of move one of our meetings to have it be in the evening, and it being the sole main agenda item.
With just the idea that it's sort of framed as like, I guess the dynamic is different, right? Is part of what I'm flagging too, in that our meetings, we have dedicated public comment time, but it's not really this kind of dialogue with the public. And just not 100% clear, and maybe you're not either yet, in what the right structure is to make that as useful as possible. But I wholly agree. I don't believe we have time, the luxury of enough time to have that conversation twice.
I guess I would just offer, I haven't thought through all of the details, but I generally like the idea of offering a session that would be, in the evening, open to the public, just for greater accessibility. And I do think that we're lucky to have a lot of folks who've been engaging in these issues, like attending these subcommittee meetings, who've been putting a lot of research, and it would be good to be able to have some of them present some of what they're finding, as I think Steve suggested, in a way that could be more of the kind of discussion. I think generally just there's enough, importance about just ensuring we have a common understanding and transparency around assumptions, that it'd be good to have a kind of a more accessible and dedicated time to have that. And I don't know the exact time. I think a lot of it depends on like the consultants and wanting to make sure they can be part of that conversation. We bring some of the information that they may be finding to bear. Yeah, those are a few initial thoughts.
Great. Any other thoughts, Richard or Lou? Okay, well, let's think about the best way to do that if we do it. In my mind, it would be kind of the high level. Just because part of it would be for the broader audience, and maybe some of it is a brief repeat of here's what the current inventory is, and then some of this discussion on here's what other states do, and then it's really kind of talking about these other key issues, with perspectives being invited in specifically to talk about them. So, but let's think about that more. I don't think that this is a kind of an early June type of time frame thing. So we'll think about that more and circle back to it.
If it's okay, I also want to put on the table, I haven't fully thought this through, but would love to have others thinking in terms of suggestions of how this might fit in, is as I think about a lot of these questions on the inventory, there are some things that are really clear best practices and consistent across. There are some others where there's kind of some variation and different states are trying different things, and it might be really valuable to hear directly from them, either like inviting them to join a subcommittee meeting, or maybe it's first they get interviewed by the consultants and then we figure out if there's an additional benefit to being able to engage in conversation with them, or if it's really just gathering information from them. But like, for instance, I think about New York is looking at moving to a GWP, global warming potential 20-year timeframe analysis on methane. I think some other states, which is new, I haven't seen other states doing that. I think that California is utilizing life cycle analysis for certain energy sources in its inventory. Those are two of the, and I also, there is variability in terms of how different states, at least in the Northeast, are accounting for their electricity sector emissions. And so I guess I just want to, I don't have a firm proposal now, but I think that that could also be a part of our kind of common learning and making sure we're getting to a place that everybody feels comfortable with. Is there may be a time when we want to bring in, ask questions of, or hear from some other states about how, if they've kind of already addressed some of these questions and kind of have an understanding of the pros and cons and where they landed, where they did, and why, that might be helpful.
Jared, do you know, are there other states that are as dependent on boreal hydroelectric power as we are, and have they handled possible methane emissions from hydro reservoirs any differently than we are doing?
Can't immediately think of other states that would be quite to the same degree. I mean, certainly Maine is utilizing, it would be interesting to see how they address that. And it would also be not another state, but I would also be curious to learn more about Quebec's inventory methodology. There was just a new paper published in February of this year that's the latest peer-reviewed analysis of life cycle emissions from the Hydro-Quebec system.
Is that sponsored by Hydro-Quebec, or is it independent?
It was Professor Levasseur et al. That was a peer-reviewed study that came out in February.
No, I get it, but
from Hydro-Quebec.
Okay, I mean, those are not mutually exclusive. Scientists supported by Hydro-Quebec could still publish peer-reviewed work.
When I looked at the paper, there's a disclaimer where you have to say whether or not you are an employee or have a conflict of interest, and most scientific journals that I'm familiar with take that pretty seriously. So it's not something I'm aware of.
Okay, well, that's good. I would be interested in seeing that as well. Well, if you locate the reference, I would be interested in seeing what Quebec is doing with their inventory. If it's in French, it's okay. I can still read it.
It's not. It's in English.
Okay, so I think those are good ideas to also flesh out. Thank you, Jared. I want to move on to the next meeting here. There seems to be a number of things on the agenda. We have fleshing out of the, those two items on the work plan and exactly, how we're going to move forward on them, which Jay and Richard have volunteered to flesh out in the interim. In a couple of weeks, we'd be ready for a presentation on the reference case for the LEAP modeling, to the extent the committee is interested. And also in a couple of weeks, it sounds like Just Transitions will be ready to provide us with some guidance on, well, they'll have their draft principles, or they won't be draft anymore, their principles, and will be able to provide us some capacity and training on how we should be thinking about them. it sounds like we should stay on the 2-week schedule for now, but I want to open that up for comment. And Richard, I'm not sure if your hand is new or old, but
I'm sorry, I should have taken it down. Most of the reactions things go away after a few seconds if you don't do anything, but the raised hand doesn't go away by itself, turns out.
So I guess I'll just put out there, well, open for discussion. My thought is that we would convene again in 2 weeks, unless folks thought we should do maybe go back to a 1 week. I don't think we're quite ready for that, but I'm very open to different opinions.
I will just note that I have a conflict that will hopefully only happen once, and I don't know if I'll be able to get out of it, but we have a quarterly meeting of the Clean Energy Development Fund Board at the same time. And it's an important meeting. So I may not, if our next meeting was June 9th, I would have a conflict, but this is our standing meeting and that's more of my issue.
An auspicious start to your co-chair personship.
No.
I'll just say that I'm fine with continuing the 2-week schedule, but whatever works best for the majority of members. And also just going back a second to the question of hydro, a quick look. Certainly, I'm no expert when it comes to state greenhouse gas accounting methodologies, but a quick look at Washington and Oregon seem to indicate that they don't account for methane in their hydropower production. Just a point of reference.
Yeah, that was part of why I mentioned boreal forest. If what you're flooding is grassland, which is what you do in Montana and Idaho, or just and in eastern Washington, I suspect the answers are different than if you're flooding forest. I mean, there is still some biomass, but there's a lot less. But that's interesting. Thank you.
Colin, your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, TJ. I'll just touch on that briefly. I've looked into this a little bit, and in terms of the Quebec inventory, at least their inventory that they submit to the UNFCCC, they kind of don't, at least my reading of it is they don't account for emissions of methane kind of in the power generation sector, if you will. They kind of follow the IPCC guidelines and account for it in the land use change and forestry component. And that's just kind of how IPCC suggests that you do that. So I haven't looked at the kind of in-depth details of that, but just wanted to put that out for people. And in terms of kind of other states, in what I've found in looking into kind of other states in the region, nobody really accounts for the methane from the flooding of the reservoirs. It's all more of a point of generation kind of a calculation that may change as kind of the land use sectors develop in these states. Right now, most of these states don't have particularly robust land use sector components of their inventories. And so I'm imagining, and I'm speculating a little bit, but I think as that sector improves, I think probably states will begin to include that component in that way. There could be other discussions too, like this one going on, but yeah, that's just wanted to put in my 2 cents there.
Thank you, Colin. Okay, so I think we're on track. Hopefully, Jared, you are able to make the next meeting. Although if there's a critical mass of folks who can't make it, then maybe we'll start to need to think of a rescheduling.
Yeah, I know that if we can't, it also affects Ken Jones, who serves on the Clean Energy Development fund board. So
Right.
we'll see. I'll talk to that board and our fund manager, see if we can get that switched,
Right.
so that I can join.
Thanks. Okay, so with that, I think we can move on to public comment. And really specific to just the discussions we've had in the last hour, but although we will open it up to everything if there's other public comment as well. George, hi again.
Hi. Two comments. One, with regards to the Levasseur tech memo, I did comment on that in a white paper that Jim DeMont and I co-authored back in a couple months back. It's in Appendix 7. I think there's room for improvement in their methodology. They basically surveyed a large swath of the available literature in this area. But I think they fell short on justifying the choice that they made for the admissions rate that they called. There's been recent work, actually, in the last month, with respect to the admissions that arrive on the so-called drawdown areas of a reservoir. This is the area that goes in and out of being flooded as the reservoir water level goes up and down. This particular article was actually released only about a month ago, and it showed approximately a doubling of worldwide hydroelectric emissions, or I should say man-made reservoir emissions. They also had drinking water and irrigation reservoirs in that inventory. And this was based on global information of satellite data set, which I think is the most objective way we can get a handle on this problem. And until someone is able to take that type of a data set and focus it on HQ specifically, I think the question of what is the real emissions is up for grabs, because HQ has got their economic interests at heart, and anything that has their fingerprints on it isn't going to necessarily be objective. With regards to the offer of a public workshop session, I would certainly support that, and would look forward to that. I think it would be very constructive. And I can imagine a large swath of the Vermont environmental community having an interest in such a session as a tutorial and also as an opportunity to offer feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Any other public comment? Okay. Hearing none, I really want to thank everybody for their attention and the conversation during this last 2.5 hours. I think we made some progress today, and I especially appreciate the public comments. Thank you, George and Steve and Mark. I know you're there also, and others who are on the phone as well, staff and everybody. Please enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thanks, everybody.